Sometimes the secure statement isn't made with words, it's made with grace. When you stop over-explaining, stop proving, and quietly step back, the energy shifts. Erasing yourself gracefully isn't about disappearing in pain or anger, it's about choosing dignity over reaction. And in that calm withdrawal, his ego feels the loss long before he understands it. When you erase yourself gracefully, you are not withdrawing love or acting out of bitterness. You are removing entitlement from the dynamic. Entitlement is the silent belief that someone has access to your time, energy, and emotional availability simply because they always have. It grows when your presence is consistent and unquestioned, and it allows the ego to become comfortable without accountability. Graceful withdrawal disrupts this assumption without hostility or explanation, and that is precisely why it has such a powerful effect. Entitlement does not form because someone is intentionally careless. More often, it develops gradually as patterns settle in. When you show up reliably, adapt quickly, and offer emotional labor freely, the ego begins to expect this level of access as a baseline. Appreciation fades not because your value diminishes, but because your presence feels guaranteed. Over time, effort on your part is no longer registered as effort. It becomes the default. Graceful erasure breaks this pattern by quietly reclaiming your autonomy. What distinguishes graceful withdrawal from dramatic disappearance is composure. You are not punishing, blaming, or demanding recognition. You are simply no longer available in the same way. This composure removes the emotional leverage the ego relies on. Anger, confrontation, or emotional pleas still keep you engaged in the dynamic, reinforcing the ego's sense of importance. Grace, on the other hand, offers no emotional hook. It communicates self-respect without argument. And that absence of emotional fuel forces the ego to confront reality rather than react to emotion. Removing entitlement does not mean removing affection or care. You can still be kind, polite, and respectful while maintaining distance. The difference lies in access. You stop offering unlimited availability, immediate responses, or emotional reassurance on demand. This shift is subtle but profound. The ego notices not because of what you say, but because of what it no longer receives automatically. The loss of assumed access creates discomfort, and that discomfort is what brings awareness. For you, elegant erasure is an act of alignment. It restores balance between what you give and what you receive. You are no longer compensating for someone else's lack of effort or presence. This doesn't require confrontation because your actions already communicate the boundary. You are no longer participating in a dynamic where your value must be proven or negotiated. Instead, you allow your absence to reflect the reality of your worth. The ego's response to this shift often reveals the truth of the connection. Confusion, sudden interest, or attempts to re-establish access can surface, not because love has suddenly deepened, but because entitlement has been interrupted. The ego struggles when it realizes that what it assumed was secure is no longer guaranteed. This realization is unsettling because it removes the comfort of predictability and control. Graceful withdrawal also protects your dignity. You leave the dynamic without self-betrayal, without lingering resentment, and without needing validation. You don't argue your value, you embody it. This internal shift is often the most transformative part of the process. You reclaim your time, energy, and emotional clarity. And in doing so, you recenter your life around your own needs rather than someone else's expectations. Removing entitlement through graceful erasure is not about diminishing affection, it's about restoring respect. When entitlement disappears, only genuine connection can remain. And whether or not the other person rises to meet that reality, you have already succeeded in aligning with your worth, which is the most powerful outcome of all. When we say your dignity is louder than explanations ever were, we are addressing a truth that many people learn only after years of over-explaining themselves. Explanations are often offered with good intentions. You explain how you feel, what you need, and why something hurts because you believe clarity will create understanding. But when explanations become repetitive, they stop serving connection and start reinforcing imbalance. They teach the other person that your boundaries are flexible and that your value is something that can be debated, postponed, or ignored. Explanations keep you engaged in the dynamic. Every time you explain, you reopen the conversation and give the ego another opportunity to rationalize, minimize, or delay change. The ego is comfortable in dialogue because dialogue allows control. It can listen selectively, respond partially, or promise improvement without action. As long as you are explaining, the situation remains negotiable. Your needs become requests rather than standards, and your worth becomes something to be discussed rather than respected. Dignity, on the other hand, does not argue. It does not plead or persuade. It's expressed through behavior, not words. When you step back gracefully without explanation, your actions speak clearly. You are no longer asking to be seen. You are demonstrating that access to you is conditional on respect and reciprocity. This shift is powerful because it removes ambiguity. The ego can dismiss words, but it cannot ignore changed behavior. Graceful erasure with dignity creates a sense of finality without hostility. You are not cutting someone off abruptly or punishing them with silence. You are simply no longer participating in a dynamic that requires constant justification. This composure unsettles the ego because it cannot locate a weakness to exploit. There is no emotional outburst to provoke, no explanation to counter, no insecurity to soothe. Your dignity leaves no opening for negotiation. For you, this is a profound shift in self-respect. You stop outsourcing your sense of value to someone else's understanding or validation. You recognize that being heard is not the same as being valued, and that repeated explanations often indicate a lack of willingness to meet you, not a lack of comprehension. By choosing dignity over dialogue, you reclaim your energy and direct it toward environments where it is naturally appreciated. The impact of dignity is often delayed but deep. The absence of explanation forces reflection. The ego begins to replay interactions, not because it was told to, but because the usual script no longer applies. The silence left by your departure feels heavier than any argument because it cannot be rationalized away. It invites introspection, whether or not it leads to accountability. Dignity also preserves your emotional integrity. You leave without resentment, without self-betrayal, and without the lingering need to prove your point. You honor yourself by recognizing when further explanation would only diminish your position. This inner alignment strengthens your sense of self and reshapes how you approach future relationships. You learn to communicate clearly once and then let behavior do the rest. Dignity carries a quiet authority that explanations never can. It communicates that your presence is intentional, your boundaries are real, and your value is not up for debate. When you erase yourself gracefully with dignity, the ego feels the shift not because it was confronted, but because it lost access to something it assumed it could always settle. When we say absence with composure exposes what was taken for granted, we are talking about the way value becomes visible only when it is no longer constantly available. While you are present, giving, accommodating, and emotionally engaged, your contributions often blend into the background of someone's life, not because they are insignificant, but because they are familiar. Familiarity breeds comfort, and comfort can quietly turn into complacency. Composed absence interrupts that comfort and forces awareness without confrontation. What makes composure so important is that it removes emotional distortion. Dramatic exits, angry silence, or sudden ultimatums shift attention away from the absence itself and onto the emotion behind it. The ego then focuses on managing the conflict rather than reflecting on the loss. When you step away calmly, there is no emotional distraction. The absence stands on its own. The quiet space you leave behind becomes the message, and that message is impossible to ignore. While you were present, your effort may have been invisible because it required no risk to receive. Your time, attention, and emotional availability were steady, and the ego adjusted to that stability. It learned that the connection would continue regardless of its own level of investment. Absence disrupts that assumption. When you are no longer there in the same way, the ego suddenly feels the imbalance it previously benefited from. The gap highlights what was being provided without requiring acknowledgement. This realization often unfolds subtly. At first, there may be confusion or curiosity. Then comes the awareness of missing reassurance, consistency, or emotional support. The routines that once felt secure now feel incomplete. The ego begins to replay interactions, not out of guilt, but out of discomfort. It is trying to reconcile the new reality with the old assumptions. That reconciliation process is where the truth of what was taken for granted begins to surface. For you, stepping back with composure is a reclaiming of dignity. You are not withdrawing to teach a lesson or demand recognition. You are choosing alignment over overextension. By removing yourself calmly, you allow reality to speak for itself. This protects your emotional integrity and prevents the cycle of overgiving from continuing. You no longer need to highlight your value because your absence does it naturally. Composed absence also changes the emotional tone of the dynamic. There is no blame, no accusation, and no visible pain to manage. This neutrality places responsibility where it belongs. The other person must now engage with the situation without the cushion of your emotional labor. They experience the direct consequences of the imbalance, not as punishment, but as reality. The ego finds this unsettling because it cannot attribute the shift to external drama or conflict. It must look inward. The loss feels quieter but deeper because it lacks a clear cause to argue against. The composed nature of your withdrawal signals that this change was intentional and self-respecting, not reactive. That perception adds weight to the absence and deepens its impact. Ultimately, absence with composure reveals value more effectively than presence ever could when that presence was taken for granted. It creates contrast, and contrast creates clarity. In that clarity, the ego recognizes what it failed to appreciate. Not because it was told, but because it is now experiencing the void left behind. And for you, the calm with which you step away affirms your worth, ensuring that whatever comes next is rooted in respect rather than belief. When we say you become powerful when you stop auditioning for appreciation, we are describing a shift from seeking validation to embodying self-worth. Auditioning often happens quietly. It shows up as trying a little harder to be understood, being more patient than necessary, giving more than is reciprocated, or hoping that consistent effort will eventually earn recognition. In this space, appreciation becomes something you wait for, something you hope to receive once you've proven yourself enough. The ego thrives in this dynamic because it positions itself as the evaluator, while you become the one being assessed. Auditioning places your value outside of yourself. Your worth becomes conditional on someone else's response, mood, or readiness. This creates emotional vulnerability that is not rooted in openness, but in imbalance. You are investing energy without assurance of return, and over time, that erodes your sense of power. The more you try to be seen, the less visible you feel. The more you give, the more the ego grows comfortable receiving without giving back. Stopping the audition changes everything. When you withdraw gracefully, you are no longer performing for approval or adjusting yourself to fit someone else's expectations. You stop seeking signs of appreciation and start living as though your value is already established. This shift is not loud or confrontational. It is quiet, internal, and deeply grounding. Your actions no longer ask, "Is this enough?" They state, "This is who I am." This is where power returns. Power does not come from being chosen. it comes from choosing yourself. When you stop auditioning, you remove the ego's role as judge. There is no longer a stage on which to perform, no script to follow, no feedback to chase. The dynamic shifts because the balance of attention and effort changes. You are no longer oriented toward earning appreciation, you are oriented toward alignment. For the ego, this is deeply destabilizing. It relied on your willingness to try harder, to wait longer, to explain more. When that effort disappears, the ego loses its sense of superiority and control. It may respond with confusion or attempts to re-engage, but these reactions stem from the loss of influence, not from sudden insight. The ego struggles when it can no longer dictate the terms of connection. For you, the shift is liberating. You reclaim energy that was spent managing perceptions and seeking validation. You begin to invest that energy in yourself, your growth, and relationships that feel reciprocal. You no longer feel the need to prove your worth because you are living in alignment with it. This alignment creates a natural boundary that does not need enforcement. It simply exists. Stopping the audition also constructs how you experience appreciation. Instead of chasing it, you allow it to show up organically. When someone values you, it is felt through consistency, effort, and respect, not through words alone. And if appreciation does not appear, you no longer internalize that absence as a reflection of your worth. You recognize it as a mismatch, not a failure. Power emerges when you step off the stage and into your own life. You stop waiting to be applauded and start honoring yourself. In doing so, you remove the ego's leverage and restore balance. The need to be chosen dissolves, replaced by the certainty that your value is inherent, not earned through performance. The moment you stop trying to be understood by someone who benefits from misunderstanding you, clarity returns. This keynote is about recognizing when explanation becomes self-betrayal. Many people stay too long in situations where they are endlessly clarifying intentions, defending boundaries, or softening truths to avoid discomfort. On the surface, it feels like communication. Beneath it, it is a slow erosion of self-respect. The ego on the other side does not misunderstand you because you are unclear. It misunderstands you because ambiguity keeps control intact. When someone truly wants to understand you, they listen with openness, not resistance. They ask questions instead of collecting ammunition. They lean in instead of pulling away. If your words are consistently twisted, minimized, or dismissed, the issue is not your delivery, it is the environment. Continuing to explain in that environment teaches the ego that your clarity is negotiable and your boundaries are flexible. Each explanation becomes an invitation for reinterpretation rather than understanding. Graceful erasure begins when you recognize that not every silence is avoidance and not every explanation is connection. Sometimes silence is the clearest form of self-respect. By stepping back without hostility, you stop feeding a dynamic that thrives on your emotional labor. You are no longer supplying context, reassurance, or justifications. You let your actions speak, not to provoke reaction, but to protect your inner peace. This shift is uncomfortable at first because explanation has often been your survival strategy. You may have learned that if you explain enough, stay calm enough, or give enough chances, things will eventually make sense. Letting go of that habit can feel like giving up. In reality, it is a return to truth. You are not abandoning communication, you are withdrawing from distortion. For the ego, this creates a vacuum. Without your explanations, it loses its ability to reshape the narrative. There is no longer material to twist or arguments to manage. The absence of clarification forces the ego to confront the outcome without commentary. It cannot claim confusion while simultaneously benefiting from your silence. This is where discomfort arises because control without clarity feels unstable. For you, stopping explanation restores emotional equilibrium. You are no longer drained by circular conversations or invalidation. You begin to trust your own understanding rather than seeking confirmation. This internal trust strengthens your sense of self and clarifies your standards. You become less reactive and more grounded, not because you are detached, but because you are aligned. Graceful erasure does not require dramatic exits or final speeches. In fact, those often prolong the dynamic. Power lies in consistency. You show through your absence that you no longer participate in patterns that require self-betrayal. There is no announcement, no ultimatum. Just a quiet refusal to keep explaining yourself to someone who has already shown they do not intend to understand. Over time, this refusal reshapes how you see yourself. You stop measuring your worth by how well you can articulate your pain or justify your needs. You recognize that being understood is not something you earn through effort. It is something that exists in the presence of mutual respect. If that respect is absent, explanation becomes irrelevant. Erasing yourself gracefully means choosing peace over temptation. It is trusting that your truth does not need constant defense to be valid. When you stop explaining, you stop negotiating your worth. And in that stillness, the ego is left to face what remains when your emotional labor is no longer available. The final shift happens when you stop waiting for karma to correct the imbalance and realize that your self-removal is the karma. Many people stay emotionally attached to the idea that one day the other person will finally understand, regret, or change. This belief keeps you psychologically tethered to the very dynamic that diminished you. You imagine closure arriving in the form of remorse or acknowledgement, but true resolution rarely comes from the ego admitting fault. It comes from you reclaiming your agency and ending the cycle yourself. Karma is often misunderstood as an external force that punishes wrongdoing on your behalf. In reality, karma is the natural consequence of actions and energy. When you remove yourself from a dynamic that relied on your availability, tolerance, and emotional labor, the consequence unfolds organically. The other person experiences the loss of access, stability, and reassurance that once came effortlessly. There is no revenge required, no dramatic moment of reckoning. The absence itself becomes the reckoning. Waiting for karma keeps you emotionally invested in the outcome. You remain attached to how they feel, what they realize, and whether they suffer. That attachment prolongs your own healing. When you choose self-removal, your focus shifts inward. You stop monitoring their reactions and start rebuilding your own emotional landscape. This is not indifference, it is detachment with intention. You are no longer seeking validation through their realization. For the ego, this is deeply unsettling. It expects reactions, explanations, or emotional displays. It anticipates engagement, even if that engagement is conflict. When none arrives, the ego loses its reference point. There is no feedback loop to reinforce its sense of importance. The quiet withdrawal communicates finality without hostility. It signals that you have moved beyond needing recognition to justify your departure. Self-removal also restores balance within you. The energy that once flowed outward in hope, patience, and endurance returns to its source. You begin to feel grounded, not because everything is resolved, but because you are no longer participating in what was unresolved. This internal alignment is what makes the removal karmic. It shifts the energy of the situation without force. Importantly, this is not about punishing the other person. If your motivation is revenge, the ego remains in control of your actions. True self-removal is neutral. It is guided by self-respect rather than resentment. You step away not to be missed, but because staying would require you to abandon yourself. That clarity is what gives the action its weight. As time passes, the consequences reveal themselves. The other person may feel confusion, loss, or delayed regret, or they may not fully articulate it at all. The point is that their internal experience no longer dictates yours. You have closed the energetic loop by removing your participation. The karmic balance is restored because you are no longer giving more than you receive. Erasing yourself gracefully is not fading, it is completion. You complete the lesson by choosing yourself. You no longer wait for karma to arrive because you have embodied it. The power lies in understanding that the most profound consequence is not what happens to them, but what finally happens for you when you walk away whole. Erasing yourself gracefully is not about loss or punishment. It is about remembering who you are when you stop overgiving, over-explaining, and overweighting. When you step back with dignity, you reclaim your energy, your clarity, and your self-respect. The ego may crumble in the quiet, but that is no longer your concern. What matters is that you leave whole, grounded, and aligned, no longer diminishing to be chosen, but standing firm in the certainty that your worth never depended on staying.